Hello, everyone, and welcome to the summary of the best-selling book, The 4-Hour Workweek by Timothy Ferriss. I don't know if you have heard of this book or if you have, kind of actually looked into it already. If you haven't read the book yet, then you should definitely listen to this because I'm going to give you a sort of brief and compact overview over what I consider the most important things from this book, especially if you really want to make changes in your life with regards to your work and your lifestyle. This book has some really good hands-on recommendations to actually go about and implement these changes in your life. So, yeah, let's get started. So basically, what he does in the book is he, of course, talks about himself and why he wrote this book. And the core of this book is, as you can see, the word deal. So he breaks it down into D for definition, E for elimination, A for automation, and L for liberation. And at the end, after we have gone through all of these paragraphs, I will just give you a case study that he also has in his book. He has loads of case studies, but I chose one just to kind of demonstrate how this person actually changed her life after she read this book, just to give you an idea how, people sort of got up and did it after they read the book. So let's move on to, I've made a little overview here again to break it a bit more down. So I will quickly go through his own story and who this book is really for, who he is targeting with this book, and then the definition. It's about, so basically he says the new rich is the lifestyle that you can achieve if you want to, change your life. And I will talk about what that means, fundamental rules, how to deal with fears and doubts, how to actually really, yeah, think about your dreams and what you want to achieve and actually really formulating that and putting it into words and making a plan. Then in part three, it's all about once you have made the decision to change your life and you have a plan, how you can change things in your life. So he talks about a lot being effective versus being efficient. So, in this book, a big part is about how you can make your life more efficient, how you can save more time in your life, and how you can be selective and ignorant to certain things that are unnecessary. Because if you want more time to do things that you enjoy doing, you need to be disciplined and kind of think about things that you don't really need to do just for the sake of doing them. In part four, he then talks about how to sort of outsource and delegate different aspects of your life. So, depending on what you do, of course, um, it could be anything from sort of minimizing the amount of emails you have to deal with, to a lot of automation, things like having voicemail set up and automated messages and all these kinds of things. Um, and he also talks about how to sort of, if you, for example, want to go and create your own business, what you can do, what you should focus on, how you should go about that, and what you need to consider. And in part five, finally, he talks about how you can, once you have established that work-life balance, how you can use that time that you have now made for yourself to mobilize your life and travel, have mini retirements, whatever these might look like. He basically travels a lot for several months, but you might do it in a different way. Um, and then he also gives us some examples of what not to do. Um, and what the big mistakes are that some people do after they have established all these things. So that's basically the gist of it, and I'm gonna go into part one now. So Tim Ferriss says in his book that he used to work 14-hour days and he would earn $40,000 per year as a salesperson. And once he decided that that was not what he wanted to do anymore and he wanted to turn his life around, he managed, of course, not overnight, but over a certain period of time, to reduce the work hours down to 4 hours per week and to make $40,000 plus per month. So, he has achieved that. And I think it is important to say that he is quite a smart person. As you can see, he went to Princeton University, studied in neuroscience, and then focused on East Asian studies. So he did a lot of things already in his youth, I would say. And he started very early to kind of do his own thing. So he created an audiobook. However, it didn't sell very well. Then he created a speed reading course at Princeton, which was actually doing quite well, but he didn't enjoy doing that. And then finally, became very successful with creating a sports nutrition company. And however, that took, a lot of time in his life. And that was the time when he felt like he was overworked and didn't have enough time to do other things that he wanted to do. And that's when he got to the point where he needed to simplify and eliminate a lot of things and make himself expandable. So, I mean, you can of course also Google him, and he has his own website and everything. And he also has a blog about the 4-hour Workweek where you can read some articles related to what's discussed in the book. So you should read this book if you believe in the new rich approach to life, which means create luxury lifestyles in the present using time and mobility. If you want to escape the rat race, as he calls it, and change your career, or if you're just simply looking for a luxury lifestyle of complete freedom, which is another big aspect. It's not just about cutting down your work hours, but also being more free to do what you want to do. So if you, as he does, travel a lot and you enjoy maybe living in different countries for a certain amount of time, then that to him is one way of being completely free. But different people might consider different things as freedom. So could be that you're just happy to work from home. If you have a family, of course, you can't just move around freely and travel all the time. But maybe freedom for you would then be that you work from home and you can, by that, be flexible with your work hours, and you can work at times that are convenient for you and your family, for example. So it could be, a lot of things, and you have to define that for yourself, what that freedom would be for you, basically. Okay, so let's go into D for definition. So The new rich, he basically says that this concept, this idea of the new rich, is that they achieve 90% of the results in 1/10 of the time. So the time factor is quite an important one here because you really ultimately want to consider time a really important asset in your life. Time is something really valuable, and you need to make sure that you make the most of it. And in the book later on, he will show you step by step or give us examples of how to actually achieve that. The new rich eliminate the least profitable work and outsource operations and work remotely. So, as I said earlier, if you feel like you're doing jobs and work that doesn't really go anywhere or doesn't really make any contribution to your life or to somebody else's life, really kind of reflect on that and think about, okay, what do I actually need to do to have a better outcome? Um, and outsourcing is a big part of that as well, if that's possible for what you do, of course. But he gives a lot of examples later on, which I will go into a bit further later on. So the rules of the new rich are: retirement as a final goal is flawed. He basically says the traditional way of living, the traditional model that we kind of, or most societies sort of follow, is flawed, and we shouldn't work for like 40 years of our life just sort of waiting for that moment to retire when we're like in our 60s. Because he says by that time you might not be able to do some of the things you always wanted to do, or what could also happen is that all of a sudden, after you have worked for 40 years and you don't work anymore, you feel like there's actually nothing you can do, and you feel like you have no purpose in life anymore. And that can also be very challenging and might also cause depression and things like that. So he basically says that model is kind of not really desirable for people anymore. So he instead suggests to have many retirements throughout your life, which means, sort of like a few months every year to go and travel and really take that time to fully live there, learn the language, do whatever you want. So he, for example, loves sport, and he lived in Asia, and really tried to study martial arts and things like that. And because he had made that time to actually really go and focus on that. So he wasn't distracted by the work he did, because he worked hard over the last months to actually be able to travel and fully focus on learning the languages, learning all these skills that he'd always wanted to learn. So that's really what he says we should strive for, because he thinks that's the ultimate sort of fulfillment as well. And that's why he says work when you're most effective and be efficient. So he thinks that working in a very focused manner for, sort of like a certain period of time is much better than sort of doing the 8 hours a day, where we might not always be most effective and wasting time doing unnecessary jobs and sort of just doing it for the sake of doing it, not really actually producing anything useful. Another thing that he thinks is very important is learn to say no. So A lot of people find it difficult to kind of cut out things in their lives that are, in a way, not really giving them anything or improving anything in their lives. But they feel maybe obliged to do it, or they feel maybe people are expecting them to do it. And he clearly says, look, you have to cut these things out. You have to really focus on what's most important to you. So if your goal, for example, is I want to work remotely, I want to be free to work from wherever I want to, then yeah, you have to say no to, meetings and things like that, maybe in person, because you won't always be there, but you can find alternative ways. So if you can't meet a person, then you can arrange, Skype meetings or telephone conferences. There are, luckily now lots of ways of communicating. So he just basically says, find what's right for you in your circumstances and then use that to make that change, really. Use your strengths, of course, and he really says, so when you make your plan for what you want to achieve, really think about, okay, what can I actually do? What are my talents? What is it that I want to do and I'm good at? And sort of don't limit yourself. Believe in yourself and really, really go for those goals and really write them down as well. But I will go into that in a minute. Um, Differentiate between absolute and relative income. So basically, he says, so remember, he used to earn $40,000 per year and worked 14 hours per week. And if you really break that down into maybe an hourly rate or a weekly rate or a monthly rate, then you could say, okay, he's making this and this amount per hour or per day. Um, and that's, looking at the time you're using, actually not a lot of money in return. So he's talking about the relative income, which is, okay, how much do you actually make in the time that you're working? And does that actually really give you what you need? So sort of analyze what you do now, analyze how much money you make during that time that you really spend on your work. And do you feel that you're being paid enough? Do you feel that that's sufficient? So that's really another important point in his book. Remove distress and find eustress. So he says basically what we should all aim to do is remove everything that causes us stress. Of course, this is hard to do, but he says there are ways of going about that. Of You have to make mistakes first. He learned from his mistakes, and he said that yeah, you don't have to accept that stress is a factor of your work life. It doesn't have to be that way. You can change it, but you need to really work on it hard. So, for example, he gave, in his book, he gives examples of clients who use up a lot of his time, but then they don't actually generate that much income for him or profit for him. So he sits down one day and he goes through which clients stress him the most, and are they really that important to keep for his company to be successful or to continue to be successful. And he realizes that these clients are actually the ones that don't really generate a lot of profit for him, but they generate a lot of stress for him. So he actually, says, okay, I got to get rid of them because I have other clients who pay much more or create much more revenue for me, and they are not causing me the amount of stress that they're causing me. So basically, he says you have to really analyze these factors in your life, and you have to make those changes if you want to be happier. And find you stress is sort of like finding things that excite you. Instead of things that annoy you, find things that excite you. So, for example, if you like to do certain things when you work, things that you like about your work, focus on those and sort of try to implement them more often in your day, so you have more of these exciting moments, these happy moments in your work day, rather than stressful and annoying moments. So that's the basic idea behind that. Now, how to deal with fears and doubts. He says you really have to sit down and think about how you define your fears and what you can do about that. So he gives examples in his book, and he says, okay, I'm going to ask you these questions and I want you to write that down. So you actually really actively need to go and sit down for yourself and answer these questions. So one example is define your nightmare, the absolute worst that could happen if you did what you are considering. So think about what ifs, what changes do I need to make? Envision them in painstaking detail, he says. Would it really be the end of your life? Really ask yourself that. And what do you actually think could happen? What would be the worst that could happen if you went about what you want to do? So, say for example, you really hate your job and you don't want to work there anymore, but of course you need the income. He basically says, okay, sit down and think about what you could do to change this. Would you want to leave your job? If so, what else could you do? Think about the solutions. Think about, okay, if I quit my job, what could happen? What would I have to do to overcome these fears of failing, or maybe not having enough money, not being able to live the lifestyle that I want to live? So he really wants you to write these things down and define them very clearly for yourself, because if you don't think about the worst case scenario, you will always have these fears inside, and they will impact your decision making when you start trying to change your life. So you really need to think about that first. And he also, he says, how can you get things under control? So once, say, you quit your job, you need to have a plan B, really. And that's why you need to think about your fears, because you really need to have developed an idea of what the solutions, possible, you know, ways of going about changing that can be. Um, and he talks about, of course, also thinking about what are you putting off out of fear, and really write that down. Why why are you thinking this? Why are you feeling that? Really go deep into this, because this is the core of making the changes to your life. So, what's the cost of your inaction versus action? If you basically don't change anything and you continue your life as it is, he's basically asking you, okay, what is actually the cost of this? Are you going to end up being depressed maybe? Are you going to have health problems, all these mental health issues maybe. It could be lots of things. So he asks you to weigh what is the cost of your inaction versus action. If you change something and you actively start doing it, ask yourself, is that going to actually really make a change in my life, and what benefits will I have from that? And then look at it, compare it. Okay, if I don't do it, what will happen? If I do it, what will happen? And what do I want out of these two? So that's really what he says you have to do. You really need to sit down and evaluate that. And the last one in this chapter, which I think is also really important, is really set yourself goals that will be hard to achieve but inspiring. So don't just go for something you think, yeah, I can easily do that. No, you have to actually really sit down and think about the dream. Think about what it ultimately is you want in your life, and what you want to look back on when you're, on your deathbed, for example. Like, what would you want to have achieved, and what would make you completely fulfilled, and look back at your life and say, yeah, I'm glad I did this, and I'm so happy I changed this in my life. So one of the really important things that I think he says in the book is, what would you do day to day if you had $1 million in the bank? Okay, I think this is not an easy question to answer, because a lot of people never dream of having that much money, and then to actually really sit down and think about, what would I do with this money, and what would I want to do every day having this money? How would I use it? What would I want to achieve, maybe still, because of course you still want to have goals and you want to challenge yourself. So I really, really thought hard about this question, and I think everybody should really, really think about it carefully, because we don't ask ourselves these questions very often, and they really make us think about what it is that is important to us, you know. So everybody will answer this question differently. But I think the core of this question is, if you had all the freedom in the world, if you didn't have to worry about anything, what would you really want to do every day when you wake up? That's really basically what he tries to get to. And what I really like about his book is that he kind of forces you to actually go and do it. So he says, what excites you? Create an action plan. So you have to really sit down. He has the sample dream line, which you can download on his blog, but it's also in the book. And you really have to sit down and make a plan for short and long term. So in this sample dream line, he gives you 6 months and 12 months to put down goals that you want to achieve in that time. And then he kind of breaks it down into, okay, so put your goal, and then how are you going to achieve it, and what you're going to do on a day-to-day basis to achieve that. What will you have to do to achieve that? So you really, really need to break it down step by step, and do a complete day-to-day action plan to actually really achieve those goals that you have set for yourself. And no matter how hard you think they are to achieve, you have to start somewhere. So think about how you can start, you know, small, and how you can really develop it into what it is you really want it to be. Yeah, so that's basically the first well, the D for definition chapter, and I think it is an important one because it really sort of sets you up for what's to come, and I believe that you really should, by like when you read this book or when you have listened to the summary, really sit down now and write this action plan, because you're never going to do it if you continue reading the book. You're not probably not going to go back to this chapter and sit down and do it. So the best thing to do is do it right now. Take that time to really do a 6 month plan and a 12-month plan. Write down these targets, these aims, these goals, how you can possibly achieve them, what you need to have and to do to achieve them, how you can implement that in your day-to-day life. Yeah, so I hope you're gonna do that. However, I will move on now to, oh, there is the sample dreamline, just to give you an idea. So yeah, basically you can use that one or you can create your own one. He just did it as an example. And he also puts the financial aspect in there, which you can do if you really want to work it out. I think me for myself, I didn't do that, but it depends on your circumstances. So if money is a big factor, then yeah, you should probably look into working out your financial situation and how it would impact that, of course. But I still think, the most important thing is to look at the goals, the targets, and how you step by step achieve them. Okay, so the next chapter, E for elimination. So here he really talks about, okay, how can I be effective? How can I be efficient? And how can I accomplish more by doing less? That is really the ultimate goal. And I really like this chapter because it has a lot of very, very good recommendations in it. I won't give you all of those because they are in the book. However, I will tell you that most of them are related to, work on the computer basically. So email, phone, communication in general, which is nowadays mostly via, the smartphone or the computer. And, he says, okay, think about what gets you closer to your goals. Okay, so you've already now put your action plan together. Now you need to really focus on how can you perform a task in the most economical manner. So say, for example, you don't want to quit your job right away, which means there is a certain amount of time in your day and in your week that you have to devote to your job. But still, you have time left to follow those targets and goals that you've set for yourself. But how can you use that time that you have left during the week, or the month or whatever, to really use this effectively? And he goes into the 80-20 rule by Pareto, which basically says that 80% of the outputs result from 20% of the inputs. So he says this is the ultimate ideal ratio, that you only use 20% of your time and effort to create 80% of the results that you want. Okay? So what brings in the most results and how much time and effort does it cost you to generate this? So if you look at your life now, analyze this, think, okay, I'm spending 40 hours a week working, and this is what I get. This is the money that I get from it. This is what I get out of it in terms of what I'm learning, what I'm, how I'm developing myself, my career, whatever you want to look at. Um, is that really 80% of what you want? And are you only using 20% of your time and effort? Now, if you have a normal 40-hour work week, I highly doubt that you will get to this ratio. So basically, he says eliminate all work that doesn't generate what you're looking for. And he goes into more detail in the tip section, which I will tell you about a little bit later. So another important point he makes is that you have to be selective and ignorant. Only spend time on doing things that give you the maximum output with regards to your goals. For example, cut unnecessary reading. A lot of people think reading the news every day is important. People think that you have to read certain newspapers or, online media, social media, all these kinds of things. But they take up time in your life, and you really have to sit down and look at your habits. Look at okay, what do I do every day that might not be necessary? And I'm sure you will find lots of things. I found lots of things because they're habits and you don't even know why you're doing them. Sometimes it's just an automated response or reaction. So, yeah, I think you kind of really need to sit down and analyze. You could even write a diary and for a week, and then at the end of the week, sit down and say, okay, this is what I've done this week. What can I change? What can I cut down on? What can I replace maybe with something that is more important? And he also says don't always finish things if they don't take you further. So some people feel they have to always finish something, even if they hate it or they've started something and find that, oh, that's actually not what I wanted. And he says, no, don't finish it. If it's really not getting you anywhere, if it's really not giving you anything, don't finish it because you're just wasting your time doing that, really. Okay, so tips for efficiency. I think this is a really important section, and you should really read through this. He also has on his website and on the 4 Hour Workweek blog a lot of these tips, which I think are really, really useful. And I can kind of like give you a few examples here. So he says create templates for emails, automated responses, check emails in intervals. So you're looking at automating certain things so you don't have to do them every time. That will save you a lot of time in the end. Same with calls, voicemail setup, all these things that you can automate, and they will just be dealt with. You don't have to worry about them anymore. So I think that's a really important tip in his book, and he goes into detail about how you can change your email settings to only receiving emails at a certain time of the day, maybe, or if you just want to check your emails, if you can afford to only check your emails maybe once or twice a week. He suggests that as well, so you don't get distracted and you really just check them whenever it's necessary. So yeah, sort of cutting down on these distractions as well. Uh, Avoid pointless meetings, of course. That's what I said earlier. Just really talk to people and meet people if there's no other way of dealing with the situation. Group similar tasks together. That's another important thing. and empower others to act, which is also, I think, very important. So if you are, sort of self-employed and you're doing your own thing, um, empower other people to help you with that. Give them responsibility, which for some people is tough because they prefer to be in charge and have the control. But he says that once you let go of that and you actually believe in them and have faith in them and tell them, look, like, can you do this for me? Of course, you have to give them uh, an idea uh, of what you want them to do. So he suggests to sort of give them kind of description of what you want to have done in a certain way and how you want it done, so they understand what it is you are looking for. And once you have made that clear, really also allow them to make decisions on your behalf. And he said that took him some time to get right because he said in the beginning he didn't make certain things clear enough and then mistakes were made. So that's part of the learning that you will have to go through as well. That you have to give people tasks and you have to be super clear and transparent about what it is you want them to do and how you want them to do it in order to get the results. But at the end of the day, it's saving you a lot of time because somebody else is doing it for you. So, yeah, that's another really important tip there. And in the book, let me just see, I wanted to give you an example of how you can do these things, use some of these tools. So he basically makes some suggestions about what websites to use, for example, or what apps to use to make your life a little bit easier. So he says, no, what's it called again? Doodle, use Doodle, the best free tools. A tool I found for herding cats, for scheduling without excessive emails, Time Driver, let colleagues and clients self-schedule. I mean, he has some really, really great tools in there that you can use to sort of really cut down on the time you spend doing things. Evernote, he says, allows you to easily capture information from anywhere using whatever device is at hand, and everything is searchable from anywhere. So he really goes into detail about how you can eliminate distractions and how you can become much more efficient using these tools. Okay, so that's E for elimination. Let's move on to A for automation. So now that you have kind of cut down the unnecessary things in your life and you're starting to make more time and have more freedom, he says, before you can actually really, really enjoy that freedom, you have to delegate and outsource some things in your life. Because when you're traveling or when you're going for that mini retirement, you don't want to have to deal with any nonsense. You really want to focus on that time being away and completely not work during that time, which is why he says it's super important to have that set up first. Okay, so he says build a system to replace yourself. So basically, you have to really put yourself as far in the background as you can, because then you're kind of invisible and nobody really needs you. So he suggests to get a personal assistant to do necessary tasks. And as I said earlier, you have to really think about, okay, what do I want this PA to do? what does he or she need to do in order to make my life easier. So you really need to sit down and write sort of a plan for this person, or if you're going to get several PAs, which he also did, you can really sort of write down, give them different tasks, but you really have to think about what are these tasks that I need them to do and how do I want them to do them. So you really kind of need to give them a manual so they know what you expect of them and to make sure it's done properly so you don't have to worry about it. Yeah, so refine rules and processes for each task and person. And he suggests to choose an agency to provide several PAs because he says that if you just rely on one person, it might create some difficulty sometimes. Also, if they're ill or not available and things like that. So it is sometimes easier to have a few PAs that can do different things. And then if one of them is unavailable, the other person can do some of their tasks. Create a priority list of jobs, tasks for everyone. So that's what I just said. And he says that's really important to do because you want to make sure that everybody you hire works as as efficiently as you do and as effectively as you do because you don't want to waste anybody's time. Set principles. So pick an affordably reachable niche market you're familiar with. Now, if this is for people who want to sort of become entrepreneurs and who want to create their own business. So if that's something you're considering, he says really think about it carefully. Don't just go for something random. Choose something that you love, that you know a lot about, and that you can actually really contribute something to. And then once you have picked that niche, which he says a niche is ideal because it doesn't have a lot of competitors, and it's sort of easier to from a starting point of view to set your business up in a niche market because it's a smaller sort of realm that you're looking at. So he suggests brainstorm products, services with ideally higher pricing because if you sell it as a higher price, of course, it creates a higher revenue. And that he goes into some examples, like because he did this sports nutrition company, he developed it, set it up, and he had to think about all these things. Am I going to create the products myself? Am I going to resell them or license them? How am I going to do it? What's going to be the most effective way of doing it? And sometimes you might have to compromise on the income that you make, maybe, or the profit that you make, but in return you get more time because you have less hassle to deal with, basically. So you really need to take all these factors into consideration. Create an online FAQ. Now, this is really important because if you have your own business or your own website, you just save so much time by doing that. You don't have to answer people's questions all the time. You literally just write it down, all the possible questions you can think of and questions that people have asked you, put them up there, and then people can look for themselves first before they actually contact you and bother you with questions that have already been answered many times. Become an expert in your niche. So he says really, really learn about it and sell yourself as an expert. Really, really tell people, hey, I know this very well. I am an expert in this, and you have to believe in yourself as well. But of course, test your product and be sure that it is what you want people to get, what you really stand up for and believe in. And he says, roll out and automate, just what we said earlier. Try to automate as much as you can in order to save you time and effort and hassle. And don't offer too many options. That's another, I think, good tip, because oftentimes people think, oh, the customer might want this or that, and then they try to give as many options as possible, but actually it might confuse the customer more than it does any good, really. So he says, really think about your options carefully, and are they going to create something that's going to be useful for everyone, or is it just going to be an unnecessary aspect of what you're doing? Okay. L for liberation. So now that you have gone through all these different aspects in your life, it's time to ask yourself, how do I mobilize my life? And here he really says, okay, work out a plan to work remotely and show quantifiable results being ultra productive. Try to move to complete mobility step by step. And when you're ready, quit. Okay. Now, I would say you don't necessarily have to quit your job unless you absolutely hate it. But the ultimate goal in this chapter is to liberate yourself, meaning that you can do with your life whatever you want, even though you, of course, have a responsibility for what you do. You should by now have established a life where it is not taking over everything in your life, and you still have time to focus on those things that you really want to achieve. And yeah, he really urges you to sit down and write down step by step, how can I achieve this mobility? How can I really become less dependent on certain things? So if you have an office job, he says, okay, maybe you could make a proposal to your boss and say, hey, can I work so and so many hours from home? Is this possible? Because then you wouldn't have to travel. That would save you time in the day, things like that. So it could be a lot of things depending on your circumstances, of course. So you really need to think about your circumstances and how you can change these aspects in your life. Many retirements. So, as I said earlier, one big thing for him is to relocate to one place for 1 to 6 months to re-examine your life and experience it to make changes. He believes that when you literally have this time off and away from everything else, you will come back to work being even more efficient and more effective, because you will have done something during this mini retirement that really fulfilled you. So, as I said, he went and learned languages, martial arts. He, you know, really challenged himself to do lots of different things, learning how to dance, whatever it is you want to be amazing at, you can really put your mind into this during this mini retirement and become amazing at it, be, really incredible at it. And that will give you an amazing sensation and feeling of liberation and also of just life quality. He says that often, these mini retirements are much cheaper than the life you currently lead. He says, he traveled to South America or Asia, and there are lots of ways that you can save on airfare, accommodation, general spending, and he gives a lot of tips with regards to that as well, which is great in the book. So he tells you maybe how to look for really cheap flights, which websites to go to, what times to book, accommodation as well, like where can you save money, and general spending, of course, simple things like going to the local supermarket rather than buying things in where all the tourists are and stuff. But these are all things that you can consider when you're thinking about mini retirements. Um, and of course, what's very important, computer remote access. So he goes into that, and he really gives some good tips about how you can access your computer from anywhere in order to keep, every now and then on track with what's happening. But he really says, okay, don't overdo it. Maybe just do that once a week, to just have the security that everything is fine. Um, but don't really spend a lot of time dealing with work, because your mini retirement is there for you to really fulfill your dreams and do the things you really love doing. He says what most people get wrong when they try to the new approach is they work for work's sake. Um, so again, this is about not doing work that is unnecessary. Avoidable tasks, don't do them. Really cut them out of your life. Um, if you're not sticking with the 80-20 analysis and plan, then you are very likely to go back to working more and getting less out of it. So you should really try and keep this ratio. And even if it's hard, he says you really should always aim for that. Um, he suggests not to work where you live, sleep, and relax. Now, for some people, that might be a bit difficult, but he says ultimately it's not really recommendable to mix work with your private life, and you should, have different places for work and for your free time and how you spend that. You don't want to be distracted by work where you live, basically. Striving for endless perfection. He says, yeah, you should set yourself high goals and maybe impossible goals, or goals that you think are impossible to achieve. But at the same time, don't uh, st- don't challenge yourself too much by trying to be perfect all the time. He gives a lot of examples in his book that about the mistakes he made in his life and the lessons he learned from those. And he says you have to make mistakes inevitably in order to learn how to change things and to improve them. So don't strive for perfection. It's kind of a vicious circle in a way. Ignoring the social rewards of life. So basically, he says, yeah, some people might want you to do this and that, and we often face social expectations from people, but if it's not going to give you anything and contribute anything to your life, then don't do it. Just say no, as we said earlier. Okay, so we have nearly come to the end, and I wanted to give you this case study, which is in his book. He has several case studies there, but I've chosen this one because I think it really gives you a good example of how somebody changed their life after they read this book. So, A.K. Brookmeyer, she wrote in the book how she, after she read the book, changed her life. So she said she immediately wrote down a short and long term plan to achieve her goals of working from wherever she wants. So that's what I said to you earlier. Really sit down and write down this plan, because if you don't, you're never going to do it. You just literally need to take action. So she pushed herself by telling her family and friends about who would challenge her to see if she really goes through with her plan. She kind of needed that to really push herself to actually do it. Now everybody's different, but she said that it was important to her what the family and friends thought about her, and some of them, of course, doubted that she would do it, and that would even give her more inspiration to actually do it. So that helped her to achieve these goals. And then she wrote up a proposal and presented it to her boss. She said she had nothing to lose, and if it was rejected, she could live on her savings for some time. So remember thinking about those fears, thinking about possible outcomes of your action, worst case scenarios. So she had thought about all these things and that it wasn't going to be the end of her life. So she decided, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to tell my boss, this is what I want. Can I get this? And then she presented it and she was very confident in it because she really believed in it. And her boss agreed. She couldn't believe it herself, she said in the beginning, but of course she was super happy and relieved. And yeah, she went on to do the things she wanted to do. She now works up to 10 hours a week and lives in Argentina. She has enough time to learn Spanish, exercise daily, and live a healthy life. And if that's a goal for you, then yeah, this is a way of achieving it. So ultimately, her advice is if you believe the impossible can be made possible, it will happen. And that is also the bottom line of this book, really. He says, aim high, look for something you think is completely impossible to achieve for yourself. Really challenge yourself, and you will be able to strive and to become a different person, really, and to have an amazing life if you really, really work hard on it. Um, and I think it's a really inspirational book because it makes you really look at your life, analyze your life, think about what do I want to change, but also what do I love about my life, and think about your future in general. How do I want to lead my life in 5 years' time or 10 years' time? Where do I want to be? What do I want to have in my life? All these things. And I think really what I took away from this book is you need to sit down and make an action plan for yourself, and then just really follow it and don't have any excuses. So I hope you enjoyed this summary of the 4 Hour Workweek book by Tim Ferriss. And if you now feel like you want to read it, go for it. But I hope the summary gave you a very good overview of what it is about and what it does for your life. Okay, thank you for listening, and good luck with whatever it is you're trying to achieve.